Good evening to you both, and let's begin with today's swearing in of the Prime Minister's new, slightly smaller cabinet, a two-tiered team made up of ministers and secretaries of state, and features 24 new faces, including an Alberta MP. Jim, how different a direction is this from the Trudeau government? What's standing out for you about the makeup of this cabinet?
Well, it's always difficult to pick a cabinet for sure. You have almost 170 MPs who are all type A personalities that all want to be the leaders and all at the center. You have to consider regional diversity. You have to consider the fact that you have the competency of the people that you're selecting, gender equality, all these things go into it. And one of the big challenges for Carney, of course, was to make sure that the West was included. And I think he's done a relatively good job at this. I'm sure there's lots of people sitting there unsatisfied. There were some gaps, I would say, as far as the overall appointments. But I think generally he's managed to hit the mark fairly well here. And I think we'll soon see if it flushes out well in the next few months. We'll know for sure.
John, given the mix of new and old faces, how important is it to have a degree of continuity with the past government?
That's a tough balancing act for the Prime Minister to do, because he wants to convey the image that there has been change, but at the same time, it's in these very serious times that we find ourselves in, to have completely new faces doesn't work. And so, he's trying to sort of have it both ways by having mostly new faces. But if you look at where the continuity is, it's in these senior positions in the government ministry. And when they released the list, they didn't release the order of precedence. But I imagine that a lot of these senior ministries, these veteran cabinet ministers, will be higher up on that order of precedence. And so that's one way to maintain continuity, is to have, a relatively fewer number of returning cabinet ministers, but you put them in, the blue chip portfolio, so to speak, the senior ministry positions like, foreign affairs, president of the Treasury Board, that sort of thing.
Jim, of the new faces, what do you make of new Edmonton MP Eleanor Olszewski being named directly into cabinet with a minister's portfolio?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent idea. She's got lots of experience, a lawyer, and very, very well-spoken and articulate. Was a pretty significant victory in the riding in Edmonton Centre. She didn't have, she didn't just squeak by. She got a fairly good victory there. Corey Hogan out of Calgary would have been nice to be in the cabinet as well. I think, as Sabrina had mentioned, Calgary has an important role to play in the West, and the structure of the politics here. Would have been good to see him in there as well. But at least we have some representation, and unfortunately, we were able to at least elect 2 MPs, so that's a benefit for sure.
John, how far will the makeup of this cabinet, including the appointment of Eleanor Olszewski, go to resetting federal government relations with Alberta?
I don't know if there's that much that can be done to placate the most aggrieved of Albertans, but I think it's as Jim mentioned, there's a lot of considerations that go into appointing a cabinet, right? And it's not just representing regions, but making sure that there's a fit between a minister's experience and the issues that are affecting that region. And certainly with the number of wildfires that Alberta has experienced in recent memory, Eleanor Olszewski's appointment makes a lot of sense. And so is that going to placate sort of the most aggrieved, most alienated critics out west? Probably not. But, she is certainly successful in her previous career as a lawyer. And so, her appointment to cabinet and the creation of these regional economic development offices it certainly signals a commitment from the federal government to heal the relationship with the West.
Jim, how do you see this cabinet playing with Mark Carney's promises to work collaboratively with the Smith government?
Well, Mr. Carney is definitely going to be the decider in all of these decisions. You know, even his finance minister will defer to him, I'm sure, in all these major issues. Dominic LeBlanc, of course, is the minister of everything, and he has got a great reputation going on with the provinces and the premiers. He's worked closely with them. He's also worked closely with the Americans, so he's going to play an important, really important role here as well. The regional ministers are vital as well, but I think they will come down to a united message, either from the Prime Minister himself or via Dominic LeBlanc, who is, like I say, the minister of everything. He really does have a lot of irons in the fire.
John, as discussed with Sabrina Grover before the break, there's a lot on the plate for Mark Carney and these members of his inner circle over the next number of weeks. What do you think Canadians, Albertans, will be watching for, expecting of this new cabinet with the federal election now in the rearview mirror?
I mean, the G7 meeting is coming up, so I think that and the resumption of negotiations with the Americans on a trade deal is going to be top of mind for everyone, right? But much as that dominated the election, there are still the issues that were very top of mind for Canadians before those issues cropped up. To the degree that they did, right? Things like affordability, things like crime. And I expect Canadians will be expecting the government to move quickly on that. And I expect the government themselves will try to move quickly. And I just wanted to make one other point about regional representation. If you sit down and sort of tally up the proportion of cabinet ministers from each region of the country and look at the proportion of seats that the Liberals got from each region of the country, there's quite a bit of alignment there. And so, it's difficult to balance considerations in a cabinet, but, I think, Carney did what he could given the caucus that he is going to the Commons with.
The day started with a statement from the Premier signaling Ric McIver's resignation from his role as Minister of Municipal Affairs. Turns out that's because he was eventually elected Speaker of the Legislature today, winning out over NDP MLA Heather Sweet. John, I'll start with you first this time. He replaces Nathan Cooper, who resigned last week to take a new role for the province down in Washington, D.C. What do you make of Ric McIver being seated in the Speaker's chair?
This wasn't something I had on my bingo card for 2024 political watching. But as somebody who served as the Speaker of student government in my university days, I can tell you that being Speaker is a really cool job. I certainly really got a kick of how much Nathan Cooper enjoyed the position. And I think while I'm surprised by Ric McIver becoming Speaker, it makes sense in a lot of ways. He's a veteran politician. He's old enough that he could retire, but not old enough that he should necessarily retire. He's known for the ability to be combative and testy, but at the same time he has a lot of experience, not just provincially but municipally as well. And so I think even his political opponents would say that he knows a lot about politics. He knows a lot about procedure. And so in a lot of ways, when you think about it, this move does make sense.
Jim, in this time of so much sudden discussion around the push for separation, how do you see Ric McIver fitting into this role?
Well, one thing that does concern me, and we need to clarify it a little bit, is the Alberta Prosperity Project has him listed as one of the UCP MLAs who is in favor of independence. And I'm not sure if we want a speaker to be in that kind of a position where you're supposed to be neutral, and of course, as a speaker's position. But I would also see it as disloyal, because you're actually a minister of the Crown at that point. You're in a position operating for the Crown and representing the Crown as the speaker, and to have a separatist appointed as the speaker, if that's in truth. Now, I don't know what they used for their criteria to determine that he was in favor of independence. But if that's the case, I think that would be a little controversial.
John, the loss of a minister and an important portfolio at that, being municipal affairs, how might this shake things up at the Smith government cabinet level?
Yeah, well, the cabinet departures just seem to keep coming. I know some watchers are speculating as to whether or not there'll be a shuffle. I don't. I think there could be. I don't think there necessarily needs to be. There have certainly been sort of one-off cabinet appointments in the past, and I wouldn't, necessarily at this point read too much into this as a sign of like massive instability in the UCP caucus, or at least any more instability than they're currently facing. But yeah, I mean, there are certainly going to be questions about is this the cabinet that Danielle Smith wants to fight her reelection campaign with? And, between retirements, departures, people who are tired of the position, people who, might not agree with the government's policy agenda, I'm sure we'll continue to see shakeups in the next couple of years. And if there isn't a cabinet shuffle, in the next 6 months, I fully anticipate there will be one sometime before the next election.
All right. One more topic, and that's Alberta moving to freeze industrial carbon taxes.
This is yet another example of Ottawa overstepping into our provincial jurisdiction with reckless policies that damage our industry.
Effective immediately, the cost of industrial carbon emissions will remain at $95 a tonne and not increase to $110 in 2026 and again to $170 by 2030. Increases, the Premier says, would be devastating to Alberta's economy. Jim, the federal consumer carbon tax was axed pre-election. So what's to be made of Alberta's rationale for freezing this one?
Yeah, it's a little confusing, actually, I think, Michael, because during the election, Mr. Poilievre said he was going to dispose of all the carbon taxes that were industrial carbon taxes, and he was pretty clear on that. And the Premier was contrary to that position. She said, no, Alberta's going to retain their position. Now, I know they're not getting rid of it, they're just freezing it, but it seems like a bit of a contradiction at this point. I'm not sure about the timing. Obviously, a bit of a distraction from separation and the pressures within the UCP party itself maybe are something that drives us a little bit, but I don't see any great concerns with it. It's being maintained. It's not being dropped completely. So it's still a source of income for the province.
John, what kind of reception do you see this move getting from the federal government, especially as the Prime Minister rolls out this brand new cabinet?
Yeah, that'll be interesting. I mean, there's sort of the pre-politics Mark Carney, who was a big fan of carbon taxes, both consumer and industrial. And then there's politician Mark Carney, who ran on repealing at least the consumer carbon tax. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how the feds react. I'm with Jim. I'm confused because there's a lot of broad support for regulating industrial emissions. And that was always one of the complaints about the consumer one. Economists said, well, it's broad-based and that's what makes it effective. But consumers said, well, if it's the industries that are polluting so much more than individuals, why are we also going after individuals? And so to sort of not continue the ramp up that's planned for the industrial carbon taxes, almost admitting that they're sort of going to give up using that as a lever for industry to make that move towards net zero faster. So yeah, it's a bit confusing in many respects.
So Jim, how much of a federal provincial showdown do you maybe see building over this latest move by the Alberta government, or does it just drop off the radar?
I think it's one of those that'll drop off the radar. We'll get one media cycle out of it, and I think that'll be the extent of it. Like I say, she's not dropping it completely, they're just freezing it. And I think both can use this as an excuse not to have to combat each other a little bit. And it might be, if Carney does take it on, then that will just be more quivers in the queue for the Premier to use against the terrible Liberal government that just come in, sort of thing. So I don't think Carney would want to touch it with the 10-foot pole.
All righty. Gentlemen, we'll have to leave it there. Good to see you both. Thank you kindly for this.
Thanks, Michael.
Good to be here.
Thanks, John.